You're under arrest for the following offences. You're under arrest on suspicion of murder, conspiracy to murder, manslaughter, conspiracy to rob and conspiracy to supply Class A drugs.
When, in March 2024, 30-year-old John Belfield was arrested on suspicion of the offences that you've just heard. He was fresh out of a year-long prison sentence that he had served in Suriname, South America. With the man's July 2025 conviction for the July 2022 torture murder of 38-year-old drug dealer Thomas Campbell in Manchester, northwest England, we have finally been able to fill in the gaps in the story of the murder that were left by the first murder trial. Now viewer, if I've got you hooked on the story so far, do subscribe, give the video a like, drop a comment when you're ready and donate. Hit the thanks button below, I'll appreciate you. A lifelong criminal offender, Thomas Campbell first went to prison in 2002 at the age of 19, the man having been born around 1983. His offence was a violent armed robbery in which he had threatened his victim or victims with none other than a samurai sword. After serving 6 years of the 9-year sentence that he got, he reconnected, not long after getting out, with a young woman by the name of Coleen, with whom, as a child, he had been at school. As for this young woman, who was, as implied, the same age as Thomas, coming from Clayton, East Manchester, she had been brought up by her mother in a single-parent household, all because, when she was 5, her father was locked up for drug dealing. When he got out, moreover, he just became a junkie. After leaving school at 16, Coleen had gone to work at a hotel and had, with a previous boyfriend of hers, had her first child at 17, the day before her 18th birthday in fact. Being aware of Thomas's criminal past, but not letting that by any means put her off Thomas, after bumping into him on a night out and then agreeing to go on a date with him, she found herself rapidly falling for him. We just really clicked and really got on, Coleen told her trial. It just seemed so right. Their first child, a boy, was born in 2010. The Campbells were married on Tuesday, the 21st of June 2011 and settled down together, setting up their marital home in Coleen's hometown, that's Clayton. A daughter then followed in 2015. Thomas and Coleen enjoyed married life. And they enjoyed spending money. Travelling on luxury foreign holidays, wearing designer clothes and driving expensive cars, the cash was flowing. On one occasion, they splashed out 10,000 quid on a 10-day holiday to Cancun in Mexico, travelling in premium seats and staying at the 5-star Hard Rock Hotel. Now that plush accommodation included a hot tub, 24-hour room service and an Xbox. Their jet-set lifestyle also included trips to Sharm el-Sheikh and to a resort in Bulgaria. Holiday snaps showed them posing with dolphins and tigers, drinking cocktails by the pool and enjoying a ride on a motorboat. They also had his and hers luxury cars on their drive, complete with personalised number plates. To be exact, Thomas drove a black 6.3 litre, 42,000 quid Mercedes AMG, which he purchased on a finance agreement, while Coleen had a black BMW X5, which cost 16,500 quid. The cash was on show at home too. A £60,000 double-storey extension was added to their semi-detached home in Clayton to include a bigger kitchen and a bar. Large electric gates offered protection from the road, gates which appeared incongruous with the rest of the properties on the street. "Keep out, beware of the dog," said a sign on the gates. The reason why the Campbells may have felt they needed such protection might not have been obvious to the outside world. Coleen worked part-time at Matalan and received working tax credits. Thomas, meanwhile, was registered as a self-employed fitness instructor. However, to cops investigating drugs and organised crime in East Manchester, their wealth did not stack up. That is the wealth of the Campbells, not necessarily the wealth, if any, of the cops. Thomas was a convicted drug dealer. He'd been to court in 2010 for cannabis dealing. It seemed, furthermore, as though Coleen had joined her husband in committing crime. The couple came into the crosshairs of GMP's, that Greater Manchester Police's, Operation Harness, one strand of that police force's war on organised crime. The Campbell's home was raided in March 2015 and the Mercedes and BMW on the drive were both seized. GMP said the operation focused on the Campbells' involvement with cocaine supply in Clayton. The couple had links with convicted drug dealers, including one man who was caught in Cheetham Hill with a supply of cocaine worth between 600,000 quid and 1.3 million quid. The Campbells were jointly prosecuted and pleaded guilty to money laundering, having enjoyed around £100,000 of dirty money between 2009 and 2015. Sorry, I actually think it must have been more than that, given how much their cars had cost, what they'd done to their home, which had cost them £60,000 to do, and plus all the other spending that they had done, clothes, holidays and so on. I think they raked in a lot more than £100,000 of dirty money, drug money, in the time frame stated. Anyway, eventually in 2019 at Manchester Crown Court, Thomas was jailed for 2 years while Coleen got off with a suspended prison sentence. Coleen visited Thomas every single week. After his release from prison, however, their relationship began to break down. Coleen claims that her husband became paranoid and accused her of having seen other men while he was banged up. Coleen made a number of allegations to police that Thomas had attacked her, had placed tracking devices on her car and had threatened her. For his part, Thomas made allegations of his own against Coleen, claiming that she had thrown things at him, damaged his vehicle and abused him verbally over the phone. In one incident, after visiting the city centre apartment that Thomas had since moved into in something of a trial separation, Coleen had thrown tuna and paint around and launched a phone at Thomas. That is what Thomas claimed. Ultimately, they each chose not to pursue their respective allegations and no further action was taken. What brought their marriage to an end once and for all soon after, though, was Coleen's discovery that her husband had been cheating on her with none other than her best friend. If he'd had an affair with someone I didn't know, maybe I could have got over it, she told her murder trial. So angry was the woman about her husband's betrayal that she went to the home of her former best friend and smashed the windscreen of her car before driving into the car. Coleen ended up in court in 2021 accused of criminal damage and was duly convicted of it. But again, she didn't get any jail time. That year, however, her split with her husband was formalised. The couple got divorced. Thomas left the marital home and spent time in Spain and Dubai before returning home and settling in Mossley. Coleen claimed he'd fled abroad because he feared he was being investigated by police over the hacking of EncroChat, which is was a sophisticated encrypted communications network, often dubbed WhatsApp for criminals. On Thomas's return to the UK, Thomas and Coleen appears to resolve their differences. Their previously hostile relationship became a lot more amicable, and a schedule for Thomas to visit and care for the children that the couple shared was agreed. The couple even attended a prize-giving ceremony together at the school of one of their children. For Coleen, however, her amicable behaviour towards her ex-husband was all just an act. The anger that she harboured for him for going with her best friend was raging inside of her as strongly as ever, and she was prepared to engage with an extreme course of action to get her own back on him. Now, on the 27th of June 2022, Coleen received a follow request on Instagram from a man called John. The day after, while browsing John's profile, she liked one of his posts. This is, of course, the kind of social media activity that takes place millions of times a day across the whole world. Only John had an ulterior motive. John was, of course, John Belfield. Belfield has since learned that Coleen's former husband was in a relationship with his ex-girlfriend, a woman called Demi Lee Driver, who, in addition, may be the mother of the man's daughter. I don't know for sure. Moreover, the man's angry, resentful and vindictive feelings for Demi, who had dumped Belfield in fact for Thomas, were plain for all to see in a starkly threatening message that he sent her in the lead up to his horrific acts against Thomas. Quote, "You will never have a boyfriend. You will have to move country. Give it a week and you'll see why. And what happens when you take the piss." Unquote. So, having read in the Manchester Evening News around the 27th of June 2022, a report of Thomas's 2019 prison sentence for money laundering, ex-girlfriend hater Belfield had found himself with three important questions. How could he A. get back at Demi, B. punish her new lover, and C. profit from those two exercises? His first step towards enacting the plan that he subsequently devised had been his follow request to Coleen. You need to understand that by the time of his death, Thomas Campbell was, according to the judge of the first murder trial, a big-time drug dealer and was thriving in the dog-eat-dog world of cocaine dealing. Meanwhile, despite having no convictions for violent offences, Belfield was already known to law enforcement as a high-profile drug dealer, just like his very love rival. Robbing Thomas of his drugs, money and any other property of his then would bring Belfield profit. Giving Thomas a bashing would bring Belfield joy, while bringing both Thomas and Demi pain. Likewise, with her own enduring anger and resentment for Thomas, Coleen was only too willing to help Belfield fulfil his vastly nefarious plans for Thomas. After their initial contact on Instagram, which to remind you came on the 27th of June 2022, Belfield and Coleen shared 35 phone calls and 68 messages. With the information provided by Coleen relating to Thomas's lifestyle and daily movements, on the said day itself, Belfield was able to get a tracker fitted to Thomas's van. This happened at home time outside an East Manchester primary school where Thomas had gone to pick up his daughter, and where, without his having even been vaguely aware of it, a 38-year-old man called Stephen Cleworth slyly bugged his vehicle. Cleworth's lookout for this act was a 29-year-old man called Reece Steven, and both men were, naturally, acting on the orders of their paymaster, whose name I believe you can guess. While both Stephen and Cleworth had a history of violent offending, Cleworth was, at this point, out of prison on licence. The man clearly didn't care about the possible consequences of his new offending. After the completion of the tracker fitting exercise, Belford and Cleworth performed a recce of Thomas's home, a 3-storey townhouse in Mossley that had cost Thomas all of 300 grand. For whatever reason, however, that first visit to Thomas's home didn't satisfy Belfield, prompting Belfield to return to the streets later that day, accompanied by Stephen. 2 days later, meaning June the 29th, in a street adjacent to Coleen's beauty parlour on Manchester Road, Droylsden, Belfield and Coleen met for the first time. The two spent half an hour in Coleen's Volkswagen Tiguan, and no doubt Coleen was delighted when Belfield showed her the tracker that he had had fitted to Thomas's van. That night, Belfield and Cleworth were back in Mossley for a third visit. They watched from their van as Campbell arrived home at 11:26 p.m. and unlocked his front door. Tomorrow. That's what Belfield texted Coleen about 20 minutes after that in a chilling message. Thursday the 30th of June, however, which was the tomorrow, ended up being something of a dress rehearsal for what would follow 2 days later. All attackers were in place, but were thwarted when, after returning home, Campbell decided to take his dog for a walk instead of going inside. Even 2 days later, however, meaning the 2nd of July, Belfield's apparently well-oiled foolproof plan hit a last-minute snag. Cleworth, who was due to be part of the hit squad, couldn't be contacted. It turned out that he was on a bender at a swingers club in Rochdale. This is what I mean about you, mate. You can't even work with your bro. This is what Belfield told his absent conspirator in a message, showing that Cleworth had something of a track record of unreliability with Belfield. Don't think for a minute, though, that Cleworth's absence from the physical act of Thomas's murder got him off the hook. Far from it. That is coming up. With Cleworth out of service, so to speak, Belfield now needed a replacement driver, determined as he was to keep any cars to which he could be linked away from the scene. He turned, as such, to family friend Carl Murphy, a 50-year-old from Denton. On turning up at his front door, Belfield asked him to give him and the two mates that he had with him a lift to the pub. After being dropped off in Mossley by Murphy, who had willingly agreed to give Belfield and his friends a lift, Belfield, Steven and a third man who, to this day, remains unidentified, all decamped to a Vauxhall combo van which they'd parked on the drive of an unoccupied house which was next to Campbell's own house. I should say at this point that 2 days earlier they'd been, I think, in a Ford Caddy van. So this is just an example of Belfield taking pains to cover his tracks. Anyway, they were there for 5 minutes before Thomas turned up, the man having been, no doubt, completely oblivious to the danger that lay immediately ahead. And sure enough, no sooner did he push his key into the lock of his front door than the man found himself being punched, kicked and whacked with some sort of implement by no fewer than 3 antagonists, prompting him to fight back with everything he had while screaming, literally, for his life. When, approximately 40 seconds later, the trio of assailants were finally able to force Thomas inside his home, the victim was already bleeding. The acts of torture and humiliation that the 3 attackers perpetrated against Thomas over the following 2 hours included the act of stripping the man naked and pouring boiling hot water over his naked bottom. With the gaffer tape that they had bought from B&Q 2 days before, the gang tied Thomas's wrists and ankles up before cutting parallel lines across his face. According to the judge of Belfield's murder trial, which took place from June to July 2025, this was in order to disfigure the victim so that he would feel that, even if he escaped with his life, no woman would ever want him. The assailant's act of dressing with a tourniquet a stab wound that they had inflicted on Thomas's right arm, which could have killed Thomas, was of course not intended to prevent Thomas from dying. It was simply meant to delay the man's dying. They didn't want Thomas to be relieved by death until they were done savaging him. Thomas had blunt force injuries to his head coming from the abundant punching and kicking that his attackers did to that part of his body. He had injuries to his neck that were caused by strangulation. His numerous knife wounds were by no means limited to his face and his right arm. In the course of his 2 hours of torture, the man was dragged from room to room in a bid, it was deemed at trial, for him to show his attackers where his drugs were kept. You won't have come across the following information in any previous account of Thomas Campbell's murder. The judge of Belfield's trial, Mr Justice Garnham of Manchester Crown Court, found as a fact that, leader of the murderous gang, Belfield had enjoyed torturing Thomas. Not only was he eliminating a rival drug dealer, he was revenging himself on both his love rival and the object of the man's affections, his, Belfield's that is, own ex-girlfriend. Mr Justice Garnham's words were, quote, "I have no doubt that the fact that Miss Driver was now the partner of Mr Campbell was an important part of your motivation for what you did on the 2nd of July. You suggested in evidence that you were being sarcastic when you described yourself, by means of emojis, as heartbroken after she took up with Thomas Campbell. I conclude that that is exactly what you felt. You wanted Thomas Campbell to suffer. I have no doubt that you took pleasure from his pain," unquote. In total, Thomas suffered 61 individual injuries. Just before 1 a.m, the 3 assailants finally left Thomas's home. At this point, on the verge of death, Thomas mustered up the strength to call 999. Sadly, he was too severely injured to answer the call handler's questions. Around 7:30 a.m, Lee Barraclough, a neighbour of Thomas's, went out on his bike. After returning home, his partner told him that she'd noticed that the front door across the road was wide open. Lee says he will never forget what he saw when he ventured over to Thomas's in response to his partner's observation. Police officers arrived shortly after, and it rapidly became clear to them that the killing was the work of professionals. Yes, the house had been totally ransacked and the walls were covered in blood. But yet, crime scene investigators were unable to recover any of the killer's DNA from the house, a clean-up operation having evidently been carried out. In addition, a CCTV system had been ripped out, as had the video doorbell and the smoke alarm. The perpetrators had dumped both the tracker and the phone used to operate it in a local canal, but these two items were eventually recovered by the police. Lastly, the Ford Caddy van that the gang had used at some point in their lead up to doing what they did disappeared. Police visited Coleen later that day, 5:40 p.m. to be precise, to inform her of her husband's murder. The day after, though, Coleen felt fully able to return to work at her beauty salon. A concerned client, though, who had heard of Thomas's death, told Coleen that she completely understood if her appointment had to be cancelled. She said, "Please tell me Tom hasn't gone. I know you're not together, but the kids will be heartbroken." Coleen replied, "I'll be in work to do you both. X." Unquote. In the meantime, police were, in the course of their investigation, reviewing hundreds of hours of CCTV, analysing nearly 3,000 exhibits, speaking to over 200 witnesses, and arresting 19 people. And sure enough, on the 13th of July, thanks to all this investigating, Coleen was arrested on suspicion of Thomas's murder. She was visibly shaking and looked shocked and confused, telling officers that she still loved Thomas and had no reason to want him dead. "This is nothing to do with me," that's what she said to police. Her phone records, however, told a very different story. The many messages between the woman and Belfield laid bare just how the woman had betrayed her ex-husband, a man that she had just claimed to love. The police rapidly got Cleworth and Steven into custody as well, while Belfield escaped. His story is coming up. In February 2023, following a 5-week trial, Coleen was found not guilty of murder, but guilty of manslaughter. She got 13 years, the first time that she couldn't escape jail time. Cleworth, who hadn't taken part in the physical act of Thomas's murder, but whose contribution to the planning and preparation of the murder, including, for instance, his act of fitting a tracking device to Campbell's van, was significant, was found not guilty of murder, but guilty of manslaughter. He got 12 years. Reece Steven was found guilty of murder. He got 37 years. The trio were also found guilty of conspiracy to rob, their respective sentences for that offence running concurrently with their respective first sentences. Carl Murphy, the friend who innocently drove Belfield, Steven, and the third man to Thomas's address, was found not guilty of participating in the activities of an organised crime group and was discharged from the dock. Now, here is some further information that you won't have met before now. Despite having been thousands of miles away in his bolt hole in Suriname, Belfield had exerted an extraordinary influence on the trial of the first 3 defendants, which took place at Bolton Crown Court. For instance, Steven's alibi that said that he was at a cannabis farm at the time of the murder was what Belfield had told him to say. When, in preparation to say this, Steven asked Belfield for Google Maps directions relating to the farm, quote, "just so I can drill it in my head," unquote, Belfield willingly sent him some. As Mr Justice Garnham said, by inventing evidence and coaching the 3 defendants on how to answer questions, as Belfield had done, Belfield was seeking not only to get the 3 off, but also to evade justice himself. Less than 2 days after his act against Thomas, equipped with the false passport that he had prepared beforehand, Belfield got the ferry to Dublin. From there he headed to Amsterdam, then to Spain, then to Brazil, and then north to Suriname, where none other than a cousin of his was also hanging out. However, despite being in the safety of South America, Belfield couldn't help but follow the case by checking up on the Manchester Evening News coverage of the case. Steven also sent Belfield pictures of case papers so that Belfield could prepare for his own eventual day in court. With these insights into the case, Belfield shared what was literally his get out of jail free strategy with Steven, asserting, quote, "Listen, I'll be good in the dock, but I'll just wait because when people start getting not guilty, they can't use evidence on me because it's not guilty evidence. I would love to come back and get the team a not guilty, but you're going to have to do it yourself. Just say, you will have to ask John that," unquote. At one point, apparently pleased with how the case was progressing, Belfield messaged another contact to say, quote, "Yeah, I'll be back, lad, if it gets dropped. They have even less on me on the conspiracy to rob. I don't even put the tracker on or anything. You don't even see me in the case, you just know I'm involved," unquote. In a chat with another contact, Belfield posted a picture of Bolton Crown Court with the caption, "Looks like defo get away with murder there. If I've seen somewhere to slide, it's there." Belfield thought clearly at this point that he could outsmart not only the police but also a court. He saw himself as untouchable. In subsequent messaging, however, we see him starting to sense that he had underestimated the weight of evidence against both him and the other three defendants, and that not only was he likely to face a trial himself at some point, things might not go his way when he did. Quote, "Not good though, they have the phone that tracks the tracker, and that's saying that travelled with my phone a lot on the day of the murder. The closest they've got is a phone that we have in our possession that goes up that night. And they have us at the house on a Monday late. And then a banger of text off me saying, 'Watch what happens next week,'" unquote. After all this messaging, having only been in Suriname for a few weeks, in something of a shock, Belfield got himself arrested for an unrelated offence, and that is when UK police finally got on his scent. After Belfield was convicted of this offence, whose details I couldn't trace, which happened on the 23rd of March 2023, Surinamese law enforcement duly notified GMP of the man's whereabouts, local policing authorities having since discovered Belfield's fugitive status. The perpetrator was only deported to the UK a year later, however, as he first had to do his time for his Suriname offence.
Camera rolling? Yeah. Ella, Dos Santos de Souza. We'll just walk at our pace, yeah?
Maverick, give me a search. I need you to listen to me. Alright? You're under arrest for the following offences. You're under arrest on suspicion of murder, conspiracy to murder, manslaughter, conspiracy to rob, and conspiracy to supply Class A drugs. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned something which you later align in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. The reason for the arrest is for the prompt and effective investigation of this offence. Okay? Right, we're going to take you through, have a seat, we're going to take you through to custody.
At his trial, not only did Belfield lie in court, so did his big sister, Holly Belfield, claiming, as she did, that her kid brother had been round at hers at the time of Thomas's murder. Nobody believed the lies that Eva Belfield told, however. John Belfield, who had himself recognised that the evidence against him would probably get him sent down, having been duly convicted of Thomas's murder on the 3rd of July 2025. What did go in Thomas's favour, however, was his apparently diabolical experience of prison in Suriname. All I can tell you about this experience is that prison conditions in that country make our prisons feel like a trip to the seaside, and that is literally what I've just read. So, not only are the 353 days that Belfield spent in custody in the UK while awaiting trial going to be deducted from his sentence, which I'm about to name, so are the 481 days that the murderer spent in prison in Suriname, even though the man's Suriname offence had nothing to do with the man's UK offence. This means that the 37-year life sentence that Belfield got will have both his 481 Suriname prison days and his 353 UK remand days deducted from it, leaving the killer to serve a no less substantial 34 years and 261 days. It may have already occurred to you that until the third man who took part in the physical act of Thomas Campbell's murder is caught and convicted, which may, as you know, never happen, the story of Thomas Campbell's murder isn't over. If this video has gripped you, I recommend you to watch this one next. I'll meet you there.